try to
in this paper, we're going to discuss some issues that are really facing private collectors of archives, books, memorabilia, ephemera, and magazines. So we're going to look at cataloguing a collection, shelving and storage, access, conservation, and the future. What happens when you die, or when I die, if it's me, and gold diggers. And I'm going to hand over to Phil for the first topic. Thanks, Phil.
To curtail some of my comments that I had to talk about, mainly because they've been so well covered by the last few speakers. I would preface all this by saying that over the last several months, I think we've all been on a pretty steep learning curve. I've had contacts in particularly in the UK, and one of whom I spoke to, and I said, you know, there's a real problem about linkages and communication. There's nothing going on between any of the big libraries in the UK or Europe, which he confirmed. He did say that he was at a meeting that was actually held at his house in England 10 years ago. The major libraries motoring libraries, all agreed there was an urgent need to do something about this, and nothing has happened since then. Part of the problem is that there hasn't been an internationally adapted or acceptable software package, and they're all still sort of searching around for something. So from all I've heard, particularly in the last hour, it's extremely promising that at last a step is being done here. But if I could just go back, I was going to say that challenges faced by the private collectors, in fact, I will focus here really just on books and magazines, and the challenges that we all face are very much the same, whether they're big or small. And as I said, we've all been on a very steep learning curve. Many of the private collectors that I have spoken to freely admit that their books have not been formally catalogued or recorded. They've said they all know where their books are, or they think they know where they are. And the collections inevitably grow and grow until eventually some sort of formal system is certainly required. Excel has been covered in some detail. I think we all agree it's usually the first sort of semi-serious. It's simple and effective. It does have its drawbacks. Access is a more sophisticated system, but quite a lot harder to use. It's not surprising that in the digital era, new specialised but fairly simple management systems have been developed, and there was particular mention from a few speakers on Library Thing, which is growing rapidly. There's also Library World, which is a similar system. They're all cloud-based, they're online, inexpensive, effective, easy to use, not perfect, but they do a good job. They're ideal for small and private libraries. They often have good visibility and sharing of data. They feature online communication and accessibility, but this is at the expense of data control and reliability. And the reason for saying this is that anyone can add and edit the records. Yeah, in fact, I was just going to say this: serious collectors therefore face a big challenge in taking their collection to the next step. Suggested fields, I think they're the commonly used ones. I could add to that by saying that for the basic Excel files, which are shown there, much of this data, of course, needs to be put in manually. This is quite laborious, although the troublesome 13-digit unique ISBN identifier, which has been used for practically every published book since about 1970, can now be digitally scanned by using your iPhone, or you can buy an inexpensive special scanner, which is very much like the one that you see at your supermarket checkout. There is also subscription services available to specialised system that will provide a substantial amount of information on your book, and all you have to do is enter a few fields like author and title, or perhaps you can scan in the ISBN, and that will give you all that. I think that's my 2 bobs worth on that little section, so it's Norm's turn to do the next section.
Shelving your collection. Pretty much we all know how to shelve our collection, but what I want to talk about is, do you shelve it by author, title or subject? Doesn't really matter which way you choose. The problem is every time you buy a book, you've got to fit it into your shelf. And this is a problem, whatever happens, because eventually you can only squeeze so many books into space, and then you have to reorganise all your shelves. If someone comes up with a solution to this, I'd love to know. I have all my books on an Excel database, and it tells me where the item is shelved. It's not much good having the database unless you can't find it. And the third problem, as I mentioned, is adding something. Storage. And we all have our own ways of storing things. I use all of these: bookshelves, magazine boxes, and I use different coloured labels for different magazines so that I can instantly see a box, if I've got it out, where it goes back. I use folio map drawers for large items, filing cabinets, binders. I tend to stick with colours for different types of items that I've got filed in them. Display cases, of course, if you're collecting model cars or things, and cupboards. And I'm sure you all have your favourite method. But the one thing that I want to remind people is, don't forget about silverfish and damp. If there are 2 things that can ruin your collection, it's silverfish and either rising damp or the damp coming down through the roof. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you, Norm. Access, right. Private collectors, as we've heard, are unlikely to give open access to their collections, and the larger public reference libraries do not usually permit lending. Public access of some sort is ultimately the objective of all serious libraries, and so personal visits are required to study and copy. The introduction of scanning has obviously been an important recent innovation, but costs need to be recovered. There's a growing need for membership or subscription fees, and also people being charged for scanning and copying. There's also a need for online visibility and of the catalogues and collection lists. People either want or need to know what's out there, what's rare, what's important, who has what and where. So there are obviously security issues here as well. internationally, there is recognition of mutual benefits and the need for networks, but there is no common standard or system, as I said earlier. The REVS Institute in Florida sets the standard, and it's a very high standard indeed, but it's virtually alone. Digitized copies give easy access across all borders, so there's a need to scan journals and out of copyright books. Many older titles have already been scanned and digitized, and are available online as ebooks. That the Automotive Research Library in the USA has scanned thousands of books, magazines, and manuals, and these are available to members for an online subscription. But I believe that digitization alone is not the answer. It's expensive and time-consuming, and we still need to have the original print material. And I was going to also mention that the next step into high-level international standard library management system is technically very complex and expensive, and it's beyond the reach of all except public libraries and universities. The professional cataloging systems began about 60 years ago. In fact, Dewey, I think, was even earlier. But this has become more and more complex as it evolved. But it is now the world international standard. Have a look at Trove or WorldCat to see what's involved.
Conservation. Another major issue for private collectors is looking after your collection. Books, particularly old books. If your book is 80 years old, there's a fair chance that, particularly if it's a bound magazine, that it'll need some repair. And I've in my collection, I have some bound issues of Australian Motorist, and when I got them, they were in very poor condition, and almost every one of them I've had to do some work on. The spines had come off, some pages have fallen out, which is relatively easy, but when the cover comes off, then you're faced with a major issue. And you've got two choices here. Either you pay a lot of money to have a professional restorer put the book back together, or go to YouTube and put in book repairs, and you'll get very helpful instruction by buying library from Braco Library Supplies, library type materials. I was able to put covers back on the books, make new spines, and return the book to a readable format. One of the problems with Australian Motorist is that the covers they've used over time, the red material comes off. It comes off on your hands, it comes off on your desk, it comes off on your clothes. And so you have to put protective slips. I use the library grade material, not the stuff you get from Office Works or Woolworths. So it's good quality, acid-free. Another problem with collections is photographs, and over time photographs will fade, and they'll really, if they haven't been fixed properly, then they fade rapidly. And so you need to keep looking at your photographic collection, and if you see signs of fading, then get it rescanned. If you've got Photoshop, it's ideal because it's basically 2 clicks and you can recover the contrast. It's something that you've got to be aware of, because if you suddenly find the photographs faded too far, you won't recover it and it's lost forever. Last of all, and I've had this particularly drilled home to me in the last couple of weeks, is don't forget to back up any files that you've got, and back it up in more places than one.
Thank you. I'm talking about the future. What's going to happen to my library when I'm gone? What's considered interesting and valuable now is often quite different from what research interests develop over time. We need to collect and record now the material that the future researchers will want. We also need to preserve the physical collections, the importance of libraries, and of course in multiple locations. And obviously, I think that significant collections should be kept intact. There's a note to make sure that there's something in your will. You need to avoid distress with your wife, partner, child, or whoever, because it inevitably, unless they're aware of the value, the books are thrown out or dispersed or goodness knows what. There are options in terms of donations. Most important to talk to the recipient first. Do they want all of it or some of it? Is the recipient viable and reliable? Where to donate? The large established libraries, particularly the state, national, municipal, universities, etc., are very selective, and motoring is not a current priority. Inevitably, they're underfunded and have insufficient space. I think we've heard this has been a feature of quite a few of the talks we've had. The specialist collections, most of which are very well endowed with material now, but we'll certainly take selective some. Would include the Sporting Car Club in Adelaide, which has, I don't think it's been mentioned that I heard, they have a world-class collection. The George Brooks Library, of course, in Burwood, we did hear about that, also world-class. We've got Motor Life that we've just heard from, and we've got Hughes Heritage Foundation in Sydney. Keen to get quality collections. If you haven't looked at the Melbourne Cricket Club library, I think we all should do so. It has developed into one of the world's largest sporting libraries, not just cricket, but any of the major sports, and particularly sports that are in the Olympic Games. But they do have generally a Victorian or Australian focus, so they're not particularly interested in other areas. But they do have an exceptional collection. It's searchable online, and at last search they had over 450 car books. So that they have an amazing collection. An option also is to sell your collection, but the problem there is inevitably the gems are quickly sought, and the rest of the books are left on the shelf. If you haven't looked at the Donington auction site, that's a good area too. They get actually very good value for the books that are sold through their auctions. I did have a point that we do need to develop links with other libraries. There aren't any internationally that I'm aware of. That's a point that was already picked up by the last few speakers. But that concludes my bit.
Thank you, Phil. The last slide is about gold diggers, and it's really a warning for you all to think about what can happen when you die, and prepare your family, particularly if you've got a wife, what may well take place. And I've seen this often, that somebody will turn up, and they'll turn up with 2 or 3 days of someone's passing, and they'll say something like, I loaned such and such a book to Joe 10 years ago and he'd like it back, or it was promised to me when he died. I'll help you sort the stuff out. I can take it and sell it for you. These are fairly common themes that people will use, and they're usually people that the wife or the family has never seen before and doesn't know. And I've heard some horror stories in my time of this happening. If need be, get a trusted friend to help you, and just refer, if the family doesn't want to be involved in handling these people, just simply say XYZ is doing this for me, you better go and see them and get them to sort it out. So organise to help your family manage any gold diggers that appear. My wife's already had an approach from three gold diggers. She tells me that they're already lining up things in my collection that they would like. So it's a warning, if nothing else.
Wow. Wow.
I know this was a very brief look at the issues facing private collectors, and Phil and I have prepared a more detailed paper which will go up online with the relevant links to things we've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norm and Phil. Some amazing insights. In fact, some shocking insights at the same time, and some very positive insights and tips and tricks, which were really quite useful, I think. Daryl.
Look, well done, Phil and Norm, for that presentation. You've left the controversial stuff right to the end. Well done. Just for what it's worth, a number of years ago through the Veteran Card Club, I unfortunately got involved in a little bit of a backwards and forwards, which is exactly as identified potentially by Phil, when the family gets involved a generation after the event and felt that they had ownership of a particularly valuable item that had become valuable in the interim period. As a direct result of that, I created a deed of gift that covers, it's a generic deed of gift for the Veteran Car Club that covers pretty much everything: archives, books, and copyright. And for what it's worth, I'll send it round the AHA committee and see what they think, and we'll probably post it up in our resources, and anyone can feel free to plagiarise it and insert your own logos and name where applicable. But it's one of those things, as identified, you just can't be too careful, because the potential of something going dreadfully wrong in the future, particularly when it comes to items surrounding historic motoring, is very real. Thank you.
Paul Rees.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Norm, and everyone else so far. It's been really interesting. Look, I'm just going to quickly make a quick statement, and then also maybe just a provocation back to the two last presenters as well. But Harriet in particular, it's great, isn't it, to see the assets of the library assets that are distributed across the country all being exposed all of a sudden, even though we're probably overwhelmed by the issues that face us with it. But I think your solution is there, and I think the National Motor Museum has partnered with Adelaide University on another ARC grant, and it's in play at the moment, and we'd be very happy to be a main partner in the application of that, and any financial partnership that's required in there as well, Harriet, as well, because I know how important that is as well. So we'd be very happy to talk more about that.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. Yep.
I think one of the things I would want to really interrogate, especially through the ARC grant, would be, or the idea of research, is the value, because I think what we're talking about here is, I think we're all getting onto it, but it's the value of the value of a dispersed collection. There is value in a dispersed collection. Phil Schudmak and I have discussed this quite a bit. We talk, about the old libraries of yore, when they're burning them down and losing all the books. It's not bad to actually have a dispersed collection, but it needs to be an accessible collection. A nationally accessible collection that is well dispersed, because we don't want to give one place all of the books and all of the magazines, etc., for very good reasons. That's the sort of statement bit done, but I think, Phil, you got to it in a second there as well, towards the end, about the gems and non-gems. We see it all the time at the Murder Museum. We get boxes left at our door like orphans, and people who of a certain age who are seeing something happening with either moving into another smaller place or they're dispersing their own collections onto us. And yes, there are gems and there are lots of non-gems. So the idea of actually taking the rigor of significance to publications is really important. Just because it's printed doesn't mean it's worth collecting, So the idea of actually making sure that we're very rigorous with our assessment of these things, and I think that I just drop that back into either Phil or Norm to consider, and about what is it about the gems? Obviously, if the gold diggers are after it, it must be valuable. Maybe it's not, Just interesting what you felt, what you think of what I just said.
I think we're very much on the same page.
But one of the things I was going to say is families quite often have a heart attack when they realise the value of your collection. And my wife continually sees something go on eBay, like a little Holden catalogue, and it goes on eBay and it gets sold for $125. And she says, "How many of those sorts of things have you got?" And I can see the dollar signs in the eyes.
Yes.
On that note, and thank you, Heather. You gave some context to that too, with your giggle. Thank you both. Terrific insights, great stuff.